So we're almost there. Hopefully you're all still with me, and there'll be refreshments afterwards to regroup. So, we've heard a lot about innovations in diagnostics, therapeutics, optimal care pathways, best practices. And as we heard this morning in the debate, there's still disparities, and in some pockets are actually increasing. And the ones that suffer the most are geographical isolation, so regional and rural patients. Geographical isolation puts access to expert healthcare, all of these fancy diagnostics and therapeutics that we've heard about, out of reach for millions in Australia and worldwide, as I said earlier. And this is also relevant for rare cancers because they're sort of solo riders. They don't all conglomerate in one postcode. So what I'm hoping to do in this session is to, is to show you a strategy that is prime ready now and part of our routine armamentarium, using digital tools to overcome the disparity of access for patients. So it doesn't matter who you are, where you live, what cancer you've got the same equitable access to all of the things as if you lived inside that Parkville precinct that they spoke about so frequently in the debate this morning. So digital tools, as I said, they're enablers. They're not going to culturally transform us. They're not going to replace, but it's how we use them to increase access for patients. And one of the most pivotal ways that we drive innovation for our patients is through clinical trials. It enables us to access to the cutting edge therapies, technology that we need to transform patient care. And so what I'm going to show you is the teletrial model and a proof of concept of a trial that we've already done to demonstrate how easy this is. So, we've seen graphs like this a couple of times over the last 2 days. Australia has the lowest population density in the world. It's a huge country with huge geographical areas. Victoria, by design, as we heard this morning, is actually the smallest of the states. And so, in fact, we can lead the way in this because many of our geographical and architectural constraints are not nearly as disparate as, say, Western Australia, Northern Territory and Queensland. But despite that, although we are a very metrocentric country, in fact, people are creeping outside the M1 all the time. And in fact, 30% of Victorians live outside of the Melbourne metro area. That means more than 2.5 million people live in what we call regional and remote areas. So digital tools not only can overcome distance, but we've heard a lot this morning in the debate and in other sessions about cultural diversity and access to people with language barriers, cultural barriers, and also, as I said, for rare cancers. So this is not just about geography. This is about enabling access no matter where you are. We've heard a lot about statistics over the last couple of days, and cancer incidence is on the rise, and the prevalence is also on the rise thanks to greater treatments. And it touches so many people in Australia. We heard yesterday from Oliver Klein that in fact rare cancers make up about 20 to 25% of cancers, and actually they make up more than 50% of cancer deaths. So we've got a lot of ground to make in terms of transforming treatments, diagnostics in a rare cancer space. But I really want to focus on regional and rural patients as well. And what we now know, and we've done a lot of work over the last sort of 10 years looking at clinical trials, and in fact in the regional areas less than 5%, and in some regions less than 1% of patients actually participate in clinical trials. So not only is the geographical isolation contributing to standard of care, but also our ability to access innovations and technology, because really clinical trials are the way that we access these new therapies while we're waiting for them to be registered for community use. But it's more than that. Clinical trials actually advance science. They actually create professional partnerships, and I'm going to hopefully show you through the teletrial model how powerful this can be. Bob Thomas, I was very pleased to hear him say he doesn't like the word spoke, because it's not about hub and spoking. It's actually about developing true partnerships that deliver professional care and drive innovation. It's also a way of revenue and job creation, and I'll show you through the teletrial model and VCCC support exactly how that happens. But what is it about clinical trials that allow health and innovation to progress? It's their success. And the major barriers or limitations to clinical trial success is actually recruitment. And I'm not just talking numerically, I'm talking about relevance and appropriateness. I'm talking about taking a trial, making it multi-centre so it's extrapolatable across many areas. I'm talking about not just recruiting patients that have a postcode of 3,000. So by enabling this teletrial model, we can actually overcome all of these limitations that exist in our current clinical trial portfolio. But one of the challenges that we have with clinical trials is the need for resources. It costs a lot of money to run a clinical trial, costs a lot of money to develop drugs. And so by using these models, we can actually scale without stretch. And hopefully I'll show you that as well today. This is a fairly sobering stat, and this is taken directly from Victorian-based clinical trials. And this is not unique to Victoria. It's worse in other states and it's worldwide. And it shows you that 50% of sites that open a trial enrol one or no patient. That is phenomenal. It takes a huge amount of resources and infrastructure just to open a study, and to open a study and only recruit a single patient. It's just unforgivable. Most trials fail to retain or recruit enough patients in the timeframe that they're expected, and most trials don't finish on time. This is some stats taken from Victoria, and really what I want to show you is more the disparity for regional patients. As I said, less than 5% of regional patients will participate on clinical trials, and there are some regional pockets within Victoria that less than 1% of patients, and this has not changed over the last decade. So despite the fact that we have a phenomenal increase in the amount of trials that are available to patients, in fact, the regional and rural patients are not getting that same access and opportunity. So what I want to show you is a model that allows this stretch without growth, where you can actually reach out, and it doesn't matter where you live, you have the same accessibility to the innovations that are delivered through clinical trials. The model is a connector pathway, or a hub and spoke model, where you have a primary site and satellite sites, and they all come under the same umbrella as a partnership to deliver the conduct of the study. I think the most important thing to share with you is it doesn't have to be one size fits all. So if you're going to open a trial at multiple sites, it doesn't mean that every component of the trial needs to happen there. So if you've got an expert diagnostic that can only be done at the primary site, that's okay. But if you can imagine, if you're a patient in Mildura, where it's an 800-kilometre trip down to Melbourne, and 90% of the trial conduct can actually be done in Mildura except the PET scan, that transforms their ability to actually participate on the clinical trial. So all of these components, which I'll show you in this and the next slides, enable you to think about a trial in terms of, if we can do just the clinical reviews, the blood tests, the check-in with the doctor in terms of side effects and safety, and just bring them down to the metro area for the important bits, it transforms their ability to not only participate but retain their participation on clinical trials. Because that's the other thing that we know with regional and remote patients. They'll start on the trial, but then will stop their participation weeks down the track because of the onerous commitment of travel and burden. It's not only the patient coming down to Melbourne, it's often their family members taking days off work, the costs of travel and staying overnight in Melbourne as well. So the most important thing that I need to share with you today, and we've heard this throughout all of the talks with digital tools, is they are tools, they're enablers, they are not models of care. So the conduct of the study is the conduct of the study. Often when we talk about the teletrial model, the first thing that gets brought up is they go, oh, what about ethics? What about pharmacovigilance? What about CTNs? The conduct of the study stays true. They are not barriers to implementing this model. So these are using digital tools that you've heard about today to actually allow access, actually connect organisations, create professional partnerships for the delivery of the conduct of the study. I think the most important thing to remember too is we learn through clinical trials. Every time a new drug comes out into our armamentarium, we need to learn what that drug looks like, how we deliver it, what its side effects are, what its toxicity profile is. By developing these partnerships, we're actually professionally upskilling people in a broader group of areas rather than just inside the metro area. So there are some key governance factors that we had to overcome to enable this to become mainstream. And yes, they did include governance and pharmacovigilance and all the things that we get asked. But I think now we've actually shown that these are all tenable and these are not barriers to implement. And as I said, the conduct of the study is the conduct of the study. But just to walk you through and I suppose affirm for you that the next time you want to implement a trial, you can actually think about a teletrial model. So what the most important thing you need to remember is you need to ensure capability and capacity. So I might say, yeah, great, I'll open a study at Kerang. Kerang doesn't have a nurse that can access central venous access devices or can't provide transfusions. Now that's a sort of an extreme view. So what you need to do is tailor your satellite sites according to their needs. But many of our regional sites have a huge amount of capability and scope to deliver most of the components of a trial at that site. but it's a very important measure that you need to think about when you're starting on this. And it's really important that you design what we call standard operating procedures and supervision plans that actually reflect the capability of the satellite site and the host site and what this partnership looks like. The other most important thing is the PI needs to retain responsibility and accountability for the conduct of the study. And that's a big undertaking. So it's the sole PI on this study. It's a huge undertaking. So you need to make sure your host site has support for the PI to enable this to occur as well. I've already said that. So medico-legal stuff, it still goes through the ethics committee as it would ordinarily, but the primary site is the host ethics, and then the regional sites really just have to work through the process and make sure all those boxes have been ticked. And that's a huge transformation in terms of trials. When you're wanting to open a trial at multiple sites, it's almost like starting again each time you need to go through ethics. It takes time, resources, infrastructure. So in fact, you save a lot of money by using this model just through the ethics processes. Indemnity is really important, but indemnity is indemnity. Public hospitals, private hospitals, if you're going to open a site as a trial, you still follow the rules of engagement. Similarly for contracts, you still need to follow the rules of engagement. And so what I'm hoping I'm showing for you is all of those things that you think about in terms of boxes that need to be ticked for the integrity of the conduct of the study hold true. Regulatory processes, we've talked about. Communication in terms of SAEs and so forth still hold true in terms of the RGA. And that's all developed in the supervision plans that we've developed as a template and can be shared with whoever wants to do this. Pharmacovigilance, again, clinical trials, CTNs are still developed for the satellite sites as they would in a multi-centre study. Safety reporting still follows the rules of engagement. These are not things to be feared. They just need to be thought about, established in the contractual arrangement for the primary and the satellite sites. The only thing that needs a little bit more thought and process is what I talked to you about as the supervision plans. And these are what I call trial-specific processes. And they need to be tailored towards the individual capabilities and capacity of the satellite site. So our trial is actually partnered with Bendigo and Albury Wodonga, which have a large capability in terms of delivering cancer care. But our other sites, including Kerang, is a much smaller site. So it's actually tailoring it towards the needs of those sites. Shepparton similarly, and Ballarat will be another site that comes on that has huge capability. So we need to think about how consent and screening happens, how the reviews are going to happen, how safety reporting and data entry occurs as well. But if you stay true to what the goals are, this is all about overcoming disparity in access for patients not just living in regional and rural, but also those with rare diseases, not just rare cancers. So it's a way of improving access, but also the success and recruitment to clinical trials, which is the limiting factor for getting the advancement in the pharmaceuticals, the therapeutics, the diagnostics that we need to transform patient care. Increased participation in trials with reduced resources, infrastructure, and more importantly, reduced burden on the patients and their carers who are participating in the clinical trials. But the most important thing is this professional connectivity and partnerships, and I can't underestimate how powerful that's been. We've now got a really wonderful, what we call the regional trial network throughout Victoria, which highlights all of the sites here. And we're all partnering together to enable patients within these regions access to any clinical trial that comes across our doorstep. We're also now connecting with New South Wales, Queensland and WA to scale this strategy as well. And we've even had discussions with Canada and MD Anderson in the US to similarly scale this model. So as I said, I don't see it as hub and spoke model, I see it as a partnership model. And this is a way of an area that is a currently huge gap, and we've heard about it a lot in the last 2 days, and overcoming it with a huge opportunity. So what we've done is we picked a study that we had an invested group of people that was fairly simple by design, really to test the proof of concept and know that all of those strategies we'd ironed out without any loopholes. And now we're going to scale those strategies to include pharmaceutical, more complex studies as we move forward. So that was our implementation plan. I don't want to focus too much on the detail, but I think it's worth letting you know Target Tepee, which has been the initial tele trial that we've piloted. So essentially we know that patients with cancer, probably the second most important morbidity and mortality is actually clots. And so what we actually did is we profiled up more than 500 patients in different cancers and looked at the incidence of clots and when it happens and how it happens, and actually developed a risk score, which we think is really applicable in this space, and I'll show it to you there, where it's a simple blood test that can be used real time in the clinic that actually has great potency, sensitivity and specificity, and actually divergent in terms of picking out people that are high risk of clots versus low risk of clots. And this is a bit of a plug for our model because, in fact, compared to all the international models that are out there, it's far superior. So, in fact, Victoria is leading the way in a risk score that's designed to identify patients at high risk of clots, which is a major contributor to morbidity and mortality, and more importantly is leading the way in a trial that's preventing clots and leading the way in a teletrial model that will hopefully overcome inequities of access, which is really exciting. So the way the trial is designed is patients get risk stratified after they're screened and consented, and if they're at high risk, they're randomised to get clot-preventing therapy or not. We still follow up the low-risk people because we think that's really important, and then people are followed up, and every component of this study is conducted through the teletrial. So all of the patients that we're recruiting out in regional Victoria never come to Melbourne. They stay in their hometown, get all of their care with the local teams. Just again to remind you of these sobering stats, and then I'm going to show you the effectiveness of the teletrial model in terms of overcoming this. So I'm not showing you this data to show you outcome data from the trial, but just to highlight some really key points. So the most important thing is we actually opened it at Peter Mac at a single site in the middle, well, 12 months ago, and then we really opened it at our teletrial sites in January of this year, and you can see when they got through ethics and consented their first patient. And we're about to open at 3 more sites, Shepparton, Ballarat and Kerrang. So we have taken an investigator-initiated study that had the capabilities of being a single site only. It's now a multi-centre study. That's really important for credibility and integrity of trial data. It's now multi-centre. It's now relevant outside of the M1. It's relevant across the regional areas for all those patients with GI and lung cancer. The second thing I want to show you is that since we started recruiting, we've now got 35 patients, which I think Linda mentioned last night at the dinner. Most importantly, last year alone, there were only 85 patients from the regional areas in Victoria that were recruited to trials. We've recruited 35 inside of 6 months in one study. And I think once we've opened it at these 3 other sites, by the end of the year, we will have superseded the total number of patients recruited to clinical trials across Victoria for 2018. It's enabled not only rapidity of recruitment, but retention. No patient has come off study unless they've had an event or died from their tumour. So we've still got patients on study. We're getting through the primary event timeframes in the timely fashion that we wanted. And really the point of showing you this is our recruitment is on par for what we were hoping to do. And as I said, there were so many sites that have opened trials over the last decade that recruited 0 or 1 patient to their study. So we're on track to recruit our 300 patients inside of 12 to 18 months to get the answer that we hope that we can get from the trial that it was designed to do. So I hope that I've shown you by using digital tools and the connectivity and the partnerships that can come out of technology that we have created an opportunity to scale and access innovations, clinical trials, therapeutics, diagnostics to patients no matter who they are, where they are and what cancer they've got. I think, importantly, it's for the scientific and the success or the intent of clinical trials, which is to progress innovations and science and to rapidly register drugs that are meaningful for patients or strategies or diagnostics that are meaningful for patients. And you saw in Martin's talk this morning, there are so many diagnostics out there that have not yet been tested in terms of their applicability and their sensitivity, specificity and potency. So this is an opportunity to scale those strategies. It's certainly feasible. We've shown that. We've done this with a single team to achieve this. And I think that, we can show that there's widespread sustainable implementation, and we're looking forward to the next one that goes on, and there are already studies in the pipeline. And so really I would challenge every clinician in the room that is a PI on a study that when you have your next trial that comes over your doorstep could this be a teletrial, or could components of this be a teletrial, not only for access but also the success of your trial and the success and advancement of science. And so on that, I thank you for your attention. Thank you for all of you for staying on to the end of the 2 days. And I'd like to acknowledge my Target Tepee team. We've got Paul in the audience, who's a consumer on our steering committee for the VCCC, and Woolett's in the audience, who's been pivotal in the background for the VCCC. Sam Harris is in the audience, and he's the PI at the Bendigo that has enabled us to test run this model in the regions. And I hope that I'll be seeing more and more teletrials as part of routine care and trials of the future. Thank you.